How do you finish writing a series strong, keep readers invested, and give them a satisfying ending? How do you build the hype? How do you market a book 3 compared to a book 1? How do you structure the series? And do you plan it all in advance? Hi, I'm trying to strategically place my fantasy series like over my shoulders, subtly, because this video is about finishing a series, my experience with publishing a 3rd book, and I decided to do a Q&A where I basically said, what would you like to know about finishing a series / publishing a book 3? And I want to answer your questions in a video. And there were so many good questions. I can't wait, let's get into it. I tried to group some questions together if I felt like they went together. So the first one here, how do you finish a series strong? There was a very similar question here where it says, I'm writing a duology and would like to know about how to make a satisfying ending. And like, I have one in mind, but how to like improve upon it. So I was like, oh, this is good. Let's start with this one. The first thing that comes to mind is make a note of all the questions that you brought up for the reader throughout the story. So, you know, are they gonna fall in love? Are they gonna find their happy ending? Are they gonna solve the crime? Are they gonna, I don't know. But whatever questions you brought up throughout the story, the ending, really satisfying endings, wrap those up. It doesn't have to be like a neat, perfect bow, everything's happily ever after ending. It depends on your genre, but resolved is the word that I like, because it means you've given that reader the satisfaction that they were looking for. And related to that, I would actually say make sure the characters have to work for it, because that is also a big part of what makes it satisfying. Is if it wasn't too easy, if they had to like really go through it to figure it out. And speaking of, I guess my 3rd tip would be figure out what their overarching theme is, kind of the lesson that they had to learn, which usually is the lie that they're telling themselves in the beginning flipped on its head that becomes the truth that they have to learn. I think those 3 things really help. And coming back to the resolution, say that you still have more books planned for the series, so it's not like the last book, maybe it's book 3 but you have a book 4 or whatever. I still say resolve the things that have been brought up throughout the story, because you can always like think of it like threads that are like dangling, right? And you've been dangling these loose threads throughout the story. You want to wrap them all up, tie them all up, resolve those. You can always cut new threads and new unknowns for the following book that's coming up, and kind of raise some questions at the very end that are kind of like brand new questions. And that's a good way to, readers don't always love it, but it's a really solid way to make them need to read the next book and know what happens after that. But the satisfaction comes, I think, when you answer all the questions that the current book has been raising, if that makes sense. And then my last tip is one that I'll probably say more than once in this video, because it's just so helpful for knowing what readers think of your story, is to actually ask readers, aka beta readers. And I absolutely love working with beta readers, but a great instance to work with them is asking them if your series feels resolved. Asking them, do you love the ending? Is there anything else you would have wanted? I did this for my book 3 in the series, and it was super fun, because they asked for a few more things that I hadn't thought to include, and I had a really good time adding those things and making it even more impactful. So yeah, don't put all the weight on figuring out what readers want on your shoulders. Ask your readers what they want. Next, we have 2 questions about kind of the emotional side of things. Number 1, how do you say goodbye to a set of characters knowing you'll never write them again? And then we also had a question here, I'd love to hear about finishing a series, like the emotional feels of saying goodbye to your book babies, to the publishing side of things, how you inform the readers it's the last book in the series, what happens next, how do you decide it's the end of the trilogy? Some of those we'll come back to, but then it kind of circles back to what changes when you reach the end of a series and it's published, like what changes in your mindset and your like future as an author, I think is what you're saying here. Let's talk about saying goodbye to the characters first, because funny enough, it's actually not as hard as you would think, at least for me. Imagine that you've read your favorite book 1,000 times, which none of us really would do that. So a better example might be your favorite song. And the first 10 times you listen to it, it's amazing. And the first, 50 times maybe even, it's amazing. And then 100 times it starts to be very familiar. But by 1,000 times listening to it, I speak from experience, because Zion, my little guy, is currently obsessed with repeating songs. And so we have listened to certain songs probably 1,000 times. And I used to like the song a lot, and now I honestly sometimes can't stand understand it. And it's not that the song itself is bad, it's the repeated exposure where it kind of loses the magic a little bit. I don't want to say loses the magic so much as you're just ready to move on to something else, to something new and fresh, and you're just ready. That's how I feel. I don't know if everybody's the same way, but I feel totally ready because I've spent so much time with these characters in this world. That said, I should admit that I'm not necessarily closing the door fully to these characters in these books. So like I wrote the Stolen Kingdom series right here, and then I decided to write the origin story of one of those characters in this series, the Queen's Rise series, and I have ideas. I don't know when or if they'll happen, but I have ideas for other characters in the series to potentially come back to them and write them. So I guess you could say that I might also be more okay with it because the door is not completely slammed shut. But I will say one other emotion that I do have, or at least I've had with this, and I'm starting to think it's coming with the next series as well, is it just feels weird to be done. Like for example, if you had a really consistent appointment that you went to every single week, or a specific thing you do for work every single week, and it's like a regular habit, or some person that you meet with on a regular basis, or even just, yeah, a job that you go to every single day, Monday through Friday, for example, and then suddenly you don't. It's sort of like an empty space that you notice and you're like, this is weird. Like I know it should be here, and you kind of, it's almost like if you have any kind of habit in general, you find yourself moving towards starting that habit, but then you're like, wait, I'm done. And it is a little bit weird. Catherine asks, how do you keep readers invested and continue hyping the story's stakes? And then she has another question about marketing, which we'll talk about in a second. But I also thought Jade had a very similar question of talking about the pressures of sticking the landing or reader expectations. Okay, so expectations versus keeping them invested might be a little bit different. Let's start with expectations. The best way, in my opinion, almost feels too obvious to me, so I'll try to think of more. But if I'm being super honest, my mind immediately goes to beta readers, because what better way to, again, know your readers' expectations than to ask them? And so if you can get readers who absolutely love reading your genre and are happy to help you, aka beta readers. I really need to do an updated video on them on my channel, but I'll link this one below if you want to know more about them. That is a great way to not only know your readers' expectations, because you can ask, but to manage them and to adjust the book to fit what they are looking for if needed. My beta readers throughout the years have always been really valuable to me, but especially I have to shout out the beta readers on this series, my latest one, the Queen's Rise series, and especially on the last book, The Secret Curse. Oh my gosh, it's been so much fun to work with them. I think they've really helped me with reader expectations in particular, because number one, I ask them a lot of questions, but number two, I encouraged them to ask questions, and that second thing actually has been benefiting me more because they think of things that I wouldn't think to ask. So encourage your beta readers to just ask. If something seems confusing, ask me about it. If something doesn't make sense, ask me about it. If you're wondering, why did you bring this up? Are you foreshadowing? Is this gonna happen? Like, those reactions actually help you know what you can expect from your readers once the book is published. But what about keeping them invested? That's the other question, and it is a little bit different than expectations. So my first answer, I feel like, is something I'm not doing. But if I was faster at writing and publishing, the best way that I would keep readers invested is to release the books really fast. That's just being brutally honest with you. And again, I'm not actually doing this because I prioritize my mental health, and honestly would encourage you to do the same. So that might not be feasible for most people, honestly. So then what else can we do, right? So I like to reverse engineer this. Picture yourself as a reader of your favorite books. What keeps you invested? Sometimes it's things like reading little teasers for the book. Sometimes it could be, for me, I like to run sales on book one, and that can kind of bring fresh readers into the series right as the next book releases, or the third book or whatever. And then that can be a great way to breathe new life into the series and get those people excited, because then in that case they are essentially getting a rapid release. Even though the other books were already out, they didn't know about it until the last book came out or whatever. I wrote some notes. I've also done read-alongs, but that's a lot of work. But if readers get excited about that, that's a way to keep them invested. Again, you're basically encouraging them to read the story with you right before the next book comes out. So it's, again, kind of lining up with that rapid release vibes of just making the story top of mind, I guess. I feel like you could get really creative with this. And funny enough, this is pretty much my biggest marketing tip as well, which we're about to talk about in a second, is like reverse engineer what makes you most invested in a story, what makes you most excited to read on through it. That's most likely what will work for you on the author side as well. So let's talk marketing next. Coming back to Catherine's question, the second half, she asked, what are some of your favorite / most effective series marketing strategies? Because sometimes it can be hard to add hype for later books. Very, very true. And the next question was really, really similar. Publishing the third book in series, how much promotion do you do? And do you only focus on book 3 or do you add in some for book 1 as well? I should probably mention I did do this video right here because this was my exact question and I was in the same shoes as you guys. I was like, you can't market a book 2 or book 3 the same way as a book 1. Like, it just doesn't work. There's so many marketing strategies that really only apply to book 1. And if you use them on book 2, it's sort of like wasted time or wasted money, depending on what it is. So I will link that video below if you want to go really in depth. But as far as that question, do you focus on book 3 only? I would say definitely not. Because think about it this way, the only people that promotion will work on are the people who already read the other books. So if you only promote book 3, you will not reach anybody new. You will only reach your current audience. And usually with authors, our goal is to expand and reach new readers, right? If you add book 1 promotion into your release marketing strategy or just your marketing strategies in general, a focus on book 1, that will help you to continue to reach new readers. But on the flip side, you do want to reach your current readers, right? You want them to also be excited about work because they've already read book 1. So you want to give them something new. And obviously you have the new book, so you want them to read it. So then obviously you do want to do some promo for book 3 as well. And that's almost more to remind them that it exists, to show them how it's just like the last book they loved and they're gonna love this one too, and maybe to remind them of characters and story that they loved. A really good way to do those things are honestly just to share teasers and sneak peeks and just talk about it. I feel like the book 3 marketing is really simpler because it's just your typical, I'm excited about this book, it's coming out, here's some teasers type marketing. Versus book 1, I guess, again, if your strategy is to reach new readers, some of the stuff that you'd be doing for book 3 probably did that for book 1, and you might feel like, well, I've done it all. And you might also feel like, well, everybody knows about it already in my current, circle. How do you expand to find new readers? I think making a marketing plan that includes somehow getting outside of your circle or platform or whatever you want to call it. I know authors who do newsletter swaps, or you could run a sale, which was one of my favorite strategies personally, where you then pay different companies like say BookBub feature deal or free Booksy or bargain Booksy to let their readers know about the sale, and then you're reaching new readers that way. As far as this question saying like how much do you do and on which book, how much really depends on you as the author. I don't think there's any right or wrong way. You can do very little. If you just don't have time, you could do a ton of promotion or anywhere in between. So I don't want to tell you that there's like a right way, because honestly, we're all different. But as far as like the percentage of how much time and energy and money you devote to book 3 versus book 1, I feel like I would devote more energy, say, to book 3, because that's something you can do organic social media. You're not paying for it on your newsletter, not paying for it, and just get your current readers excited that way. So that's kind of on the more energy side. And then I would devote probably more of my budget, honestly, to book 1 by doing things like paying BookBub feature deal to do a sale. I'll link this video below if you want to know more about that, because that's a whole other thing. Or you could devote energy as well and do like newsletter swaps, or just finding ways to market book 1. Probably I would say like 70% book 1, 30% book 3, or like maybe 60-40. I don't know though, because I feel like I'm trying to math it and I don't know if there is actually a percentage that I've ever intentionally done. And I think it also depends on the week and the day. Like on release day, I'm definitely way heavier on book 3, and release week, I'm like book 3, book 3, book 3. And I probably don't do any book 1 promo, but maybe a couple weeks before, I might really focus on the sale for book 1 and really do a ton of promo for that, for example. But if you have the mindset of reaching new readers and current readers, and you don't do either or, but you try to do both, that will help you to figure out how to market book 1 and book 3 in a balanced way and kind of split your time and energy so that you're not too heavy on one or the other. Probably my personal favorite, okay, take this with a grain of salt, this is what works well for me so far, is I really love running a sale on book 1 and bringing in brand new readers that way, and then encouraging them to continue reading through the series. I could talk about marketing all day long, and technically this next question is about marketing, but it's just a little bit different. So if the tones and themes of book 3 are much more heightened / intense than book 1, how do you market book 3 or whatever it is using book 1? I gotta think about this honestly, because my gut reaction was, is that a good idea? Ooh, I'd be really, really, really careful of that, because just again, putting yourself in your reader's shoes, let's think really logically. If I was a reader and I loved, you're saying that the tones and themes are much more heightened and intense. So I'm assuming that book 1 is more, I'm gonna say chill, less intense, right? Gosh, I don't know exactly what you're referring to, so it's hard for me to picture it, but let's just say it's a little bit more mellow of a book. Picture your readers coming in, okay? The readers who loved that are going to want more of that. And there's a chance they might be very frustrated that this series, because it's basically you're asking, how do I market 2 books that aren't really the same, that don't really quite go together anymore? And when you have a series, usually you want it to go together. Usually when you have readers, they only like to read one specific type of thing. So if you want to really keep your readers, really get them to stick with you and read through all your books, you want to continue giving them more of what they love. And what you're basically saying is, how do I market this if I might not be giving them what they love? And on the flip side, again, thinking logically, maybe, because neither of these things are bad. So maybe you've got readers who love the really high intensity and they want it to be more heightened emotions like you're talking about. Those readers would love book 3, but would they like book 1? And are you gonna really struggle to get them to give book 1 a chance? You know what I'm saying? So I think you might be setting yourself up for basically a more difficult marketing situation in general. Being totally honest with you, this might make things harder for you. And you could do it anyway. You could go into it just being like, I know it's gonna be a little harder, and that's fine. If you decide to do that, I would recommend being really upfront with your readers, because picture this, if they know that it's going from cutesy or whatever to everybody's dying, I don't know what the heightened emotions are, then as long as they know going into it and they have that expectation, if they decide to pick it up, it's on them, and I think they'll be more understanding. If they don't know going into it, it could lead to bad reviews. It could lead to them saying, I did not like this. This was not what I expected. I liked book 1, book 3 made me mad, or things like that. And you don't want that. You don't want the bad reviews. So if you do choose to go this direction, I'd say be very upfront with your readers. Let them know. It sounds like you probably have already started this and you're already going this direction. So that's my advice. But if you haven't already gone this direction, honestly, my advice would be to try to have more consistency throughout the series. So for example, if you haven't published book 1 yet and you're in book 3 and you're like, wow, it's really amping up, this is where I want it to be, you could go back to book 1 and see if you can rewrite and bring it up to that level, and probably book 2 also, and kind of like make it all consistent. Or if you're like, book 1 is already out, I've been ramping up to book 3. Sorry, this looks backwards to you guys. Let me go like this. Book 1 is already out. Book 2 is a little bit more intense and that's already out. Book 3 was gonna be way up here. I don't know. But I really want my readers to love it and stick around, so I'm going to bring it down. I'm gonna lower that intensity. If you feel like you can do that, that might be wise, because that way you can make your readers happy. And ultimately that is our goal if we're wanting to sell books, is to make your readers happy and like the books. I rambled a lot about that. I hope that makes sense. The next question is about structure, and there's actually a few questions on structure. So the first one is, how do you structure a trilogy, and what plotting structure would be ideal for a trilogy? When I read this question, I am not sure if you're saying like, how do I do it? I can tell you my personal strategy, or if you're saying like, what's the right way? Because that's kind of what I'm getting from the word ideal. So I have to say this because I think it's really, really important, especially for newer authors, to hear this. There is no right way, and there probably isn't even an ideal way, to be honest with you. I think it really depends on the person and the story and your publishing goals and how fast you're wanting to write and how much time you have. Like, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So I've done the completely wing it approach. I made it a little difficult with editing, but we figured it out. I've done the more structured approach with the Stolen Kingdom series, where I had a general sense of where the entire series was going. I used Save the Cat Writes a Novel to kind of just plot the 15 story beats for each book and get like a big picture bird's eye view. And then I've done something kind of in between for this series, where I wrote book 1 thinking it was a standalone, and then I was like, oh, there's more to the story, so I kept going and I plotted the next 2 books after the first book was done, and they've all worked. So that's the first thing you should know, is there's like no right way. There's no only way. What I will say is it does help me to know kind of the end destination. So for people who are like, I'm writing a series and I'm not sure how many books there are going to be, that might be tough for me. I think I would want to know at least a sense of how many books I think there will be, but more importantly, what the ending is, so that I kind of know what I'm aiming for. if that makes sense. So that's kind of answering the second half of your question, but coming back to the first part, like what I do, I personally really love the Save the Cat Writes a Novel outlining method. It really helps me. And I just did this whole experiment. If you're curious and you just want to like see how that works with plotting, it was really, really fun. And the cool thing about that book is while it technically applies to individual novels, right? So each novel, the idea is 15 story beats that get you from beginning to end. It actually also can apply to a series. And I think in the more recent book, Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, Jessica Brody actually breaks down how she applies this to series. So that could be worth checking out if you're interested. But like I wrote down an example. Let's say for my 3-book series, book 3 is not on the desk, but just pretend it's there. Book 1 might be like opening image, setup, catalyst, debate, and maybe break into 2. And that's kind of where it ends. And the book itself actually has 15 story beats, but like for the overarching series. And then book 2, again, has all 15 story beats within it, but in the series arc, we're breaking into the Act 2 world. We're having lots of B story, fun and games, midpoint, maybe a little bit of bad guys closing in, and it ends kind of on the bad guys vibes. So that's why you'll typically see book 2s, in a trilogy at least, ending a little bit on the darker side, because they typically do follow this structure, and it ends on kind of like bad guys closing in, or even the all is lost / the dark night of the soul moment. And then book 3 typically is like, maybe it's the all is lost, dark night of the soul, or maybe that happened at the end of book 2, and then you break into 3, you've got your 5-point finale and your final image, and that's a really big beat. It sounds short, but it's really big. That's why book 3s typically feel very epic, and like the entire book is the climax, because it basically is, as far as the like overarching series beat, if that makes sense. Okay, my back is starting to hurt, so I'm gonna come sit in the comfy chair. Courtney asks, I was just talking about this in one of my writers groups about publishing a series. Apparently with traditional publishing, publishers recommend you only write the first book in series, as opposed to self-publishing, where I think most people would recommend you write at least the next book before you publish the first, so you can rapid release, put the next chapters in the back, etc. What do you think? I would be curious on your thoughts on having published multiple series, what you've learned, and what's changed. This is such a good question. So the reason that TradPub recommends that to authors is so that they don't waste their time, right? They want to see how book 1 sells before they worry about book 2. I would argue, even though indie authors do typically write books 2 and maybe more than that, I would argue that technically this advice probably applies to indie authors as well. Because again, if book 1 didn't go well, do we want to waste our time on book 2? But that said, for most of us, I am not going to just drop out of a series halfway through. Once I start it, I'm gonna finish the series. And I think even in TradPub, if those authors had a say, they would finish their series. So if you think of it that way, the first question you should probably ask yourself for whether you should or shouldn't keep going is, would I finish the series no matter what, whether it sells well or not? Because if your answer is yes, I would finish no matter what, then it could be very beneficial to write even the entire series if you're able to hold back. The benefit there would obviously be that as you write each book, you're going to get to know the characters better, and you can go back and apply things to book 1. You can go back and add little bits of foreshadowing even to book 1 that you didn't think of until you got to book 4 or whatever. I can see the benefit of that if you're like, I for sure am going to finish the series. But the second question you would probably want to ask yourself is, do I have the patience to hold back books? Because I don't. So my problem has always been, well, once I start one book, I want to get that book done as fast as possible, and that's my focus. So the only time I would work on a second book is when there was like a gap in my publishing schedule. For example, if I'm working on book 1, but I have to send it to beta readers for a month and I'm not working on it, that's when I might work on book 2. And I think that's kind of like the happy medium to answer your question. It's not necessarily the right way because it really depends on how you answer those questions, but it works really well for me because I know that I'm going to finish a series if I love it. But that way, the next book isn't so done that I'm not able to listen to reader feedback either. So for example, if the book wasn't doing very well, maybe I would change it from a 4-book series to a 2-book series. If possible. Maybe I'd be like, okay, this is not doing super great, but there is more story to be told. How can I make it all fit into the next book and then wrap it up and move on? You know what I'm saying? And then another thing on top of that to consider is, like I said earlier, it really helps me to know my end goal, to know where the whole series is going. So I would say at minimum, you probably need to plot out the whole series. Okay, I'm gonna backpedal and just say, here's my personal opinion. I don't think I would stop myself from starting to write the next book if book one's been finished, or if it's currently in a place where you don't need to work on it, because like I said, it's with beta readers or with your editor. I think that's a fantastic time to start the next book. It can only benefit you, in my opinion, because number one, it's moving you towards the goal of more books in the series, which for most of us, we're probably going to move forward with that goal, so that's only helping you. But number two, even if you did decide, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and somehow, wrap up book one, kind of give it a more resolved ending, leave it at that, and not go forward with the series, even if you did that, I still think that the other stuff you might have wrote for the series, like say you started book two, or even you started editing book two and you had a whole first draft, I think that still benefits you because it helped you practice your writing craft, and it maybe helped you figure out that you didn't want to publish that book, and that might have been the only way to figure it out. I think it was Sarah Cannon who said this before, that no writing is wasted and it's all helping you. So again, if you weren't working on book one and you had the space to work on two, why not? I think is ultimately my opinion. I hope that makes sense. Jade asks, were there any mistakes in books one and two, she's talking to me, that I had to correct or smooth over in book three, such as plot holes or inconsistencies? So funny enough, I can't think of anything in books one and two, but this series right here gave me some trouble because this series, the Stolen Kingdom series, is fully published. And Jezebel, the main character in the next series, the Queen's Rise series, is the villain in this series. And so the Queen's Rise series, I naturally called it a villain origin story. That lets you know what direction it's going. But I found myself wishing it wasn't a villain origin story because I was like, I made it work. It was set in stone, there was no going back, but I found myself wishing, I was like, this could have gone a whole different direction. And I like the direction it went, but I found myself wanting to naturally go a different direction. That did kind of affect book three, not in a bad way, just in I kind of blocked myself in a corner here, and I have to stay in this corner and make it work. And then this question here, do you think that short action-packed books are better than one long book that ebbs and flows, or vice versa? Okay, these questions of what is better very, 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 very often are based on preference. And so I think this is a perfect example of it because I do not believe that one is better than the other. I would instead ask you, what do readers like? And I think we both know that the answer is some readers love shorter books, some readers want longer books. It really, really depends on what your readers want. And if you don't have a target readership created yet, then now is the perfect time to write the type of books that you most enjoy, then cultivate a readership that likes that kind of book. So do you like to write shorter books? Cultivate a readership that likes that and do what you like to do. Or do you like to write longer books? Then cultivate a readership that enjoys that, because there are readers who like both and readers who gravitate to one or the other. Neither one is wrong. If you're asking more about the pros and cons to each one, I would say I've started leaning towards shorter books because I can just be faster, because each part of the writing process is faster. The first draft is faster, editing is faster, having readers go through it is faster, having an editor go through it is faster and cheaper. So I can see some benefits to that. But as far as creating a book that has a massive fan base that readers get so invested in and they need to know everything about this character, and really giving you a chance to let them know everything about the character and really expand on the world, that would obviously take a much longer book to do things like that. And there are readers who really, really crave stuff like that. And like, look at Sarah J. Maas's books, for example, of that. Or the new Fourth Wing series, which those books are massive. So yeah, neither one is better, and I'm not going to choose one over the other. I'm just going to say that I've naturally started to gravitate towards shorter in this season of life, and ultimately I'm going to give you this answer that sounds cheesy, but it's not. I swear this is my sincere answer, which is ultimately you got to write what your book needs in whatever length it needs to be. Don't try to add to a story that feels complete, and don't try to shorten a story that feels like it needs more. You need to write whatever the story itself needs and trust your instincts on that. A great example of this would be The Secret Gift, because this was intended to be a short story. When I was writing it, it turned into a novella, and I was trying to make that work, but my readers, again, asking readers what they wanted, they were telling me that they felt there needed to be more story, and I expanded on that and turned it into a full novel. And then each book in the series has gotten longer, so book 3 is the longest book I've written since The Enchanted Crown, which is a beast of a book. This was my biggest one, I think, that I've ever written. All right, last but not least, where can we find classes you teach on writing and self-publishing, and what books do you recommend to help with self-publishing also? That is so sweet. Thank you so much. I don't pretend to be an expert on writing, and I don't have any courses on writing itself, but as far as publishing, I do have 7 years experience, and I made this course that's on Udemy. I will link it below with pretty much everything that I know personally about self-publishing. So I would definitely recommend it. It's had over 2,000 students. It gets great reviews, and it very, very often goes on sale for as low as $10 or $15. So definitely check that out. I'll link it below. And I'm also a proud affiliate of Sarah Cannon's self-publishing course called Publish and Thrive, which is basically a much more advanced course on self-publishing that I took when I first started out, and I really, really, really got a lot out of it, and it's been upgraded since. And so like I said, it's way more advanced, and it also has a really big Facebook community as well that goes with it. Both of those I would recommend. I'll link them below. And I will also say, as far as books on self-publishing, I have been trying to write one using the first draft that I wrote for the course back in 2020. That has been my project. That has been something I've been wanting to work on for years now. And so I'm really, really hoping to finally edit that and publish it either this year or more likely in early 2025. So stay tuned for that. But honestly, it's going to be very, very similar to the course info because it's my knowledge. So if you want to check out the course in the meantime, I'll link that below. Thank you guys so much for the questions and for being excited about The Secret Curse. I can't wait for you to read it. It's going to be so, so, so fun. And until next time, I will talk to you again very soon. Bye.